morning. How you doing? Doing all right? Okay, well, this is going to be an interactive program, so you got to know right from the beginning, I'm not one to stand behind podiums. All right, so this is where we need some feedback. What do we know about podiums and the people that stand behind them? Come on, go ahead. What's that? Politicians, awesome. I should grab the box and go get on it. What else do we know? Good one. Preachers stand behind the podium. Who else stands behind podiums? Public speakers, well played. What do they typically do? They hold on to it. So there's a couple things that I grew up learning in small town Iowa. The person behind the podium is usually the expert. And my challenge for you tonight is, this one's a little bigger than my average podium. I would turn this around and challenge you to simply say the expert is sitting in your seat right now. Because one thing that I know to be true, something I learned as a small child growing up that my parents instilled in me, is that the answer is never just one person, but rather a collective group of individuals coming together to solve a problem. And so this problem is not going away anytime soon, but one thing, again, that we know to be true as executive directors of nonprofits, that it is my sole responsibility to put myself out of business. It is my sole responsibility to solve a problem so that my nonprofit has no reason to exist. Therefore, I don't need a job. So when you think about that task and homelessness in our community and homelessness in central Iowa, that's a pretty daunting task. But I get up every single day understanding and knowing that that's my responsibility, to end homelessness and to make sure that parents don't have to pick between putting food on the table for their children and trying to figure out how they're going to pay rent. Because unfortunately, while each one of us have a place to lay our heads and most likely know where our next meal is coming from, too many Iowans today don't. And as much as we see it in urban areas, in the city of Des Moines and our 9-county area around it, we're seeing it more and more in our rural communities across the state of Iowa. We're seeing homelessness spread beyond, I think, what any of us would ever imagine. Now, I'll go back here a little bit, and in a second I'm going to invite you guys to a conversation. But I'll start with a little bit of my history. So I grew up in a small town of West Branch, Iowa. Anybody know West Branch? Yes. Okay, you can drill me about any question, Herbert Hoover, and I got you, all right? So growing up in a small town, you go to see the Herbert Hoover. And what is the one thing Herbert Hoover was known for?
The Great Depression and Hooverville.
Okay, what did he do? So there's a lot of things. What was that? He fed people. I remember from a very small age going through the Herbert Hoover Museum and seeing what he did to provide grain to people who were famished. He went back to his Iowa roots and he fed people. So I realize that now today, more than ever, how important our economy is here in the state of Iowa and how important our contribution is when it comes to hunger in our communities. But then I go back to homelessness. So from a 100,000 foot view, what a lot of people don't know, and this is where I hope this video does not go viral, one of the things that we have going for us in the state of Iowa is we're actually number one. We have the fewest number of homeless per capita in the entire United States. So this is the part that if you'd like to read a really awesome report, it's the Housing and Urban Development. It just came out, 100 pages of light reading. And what you'll find in there, if you do a search for the state of Iowa, is we're doing pretty darn good. So how do we stay ahead of the curve? How do we continue to make sure that people know who we are, why we exist, and what we're doing to lift people up in our community so that we don't see what's happening right now on our West Coast in our own state? If anybody's heard any news recently, up and down the entire West Coast, it's now been passed by a federal court, federal judge, that says anyone receiving public dollars in the state of California must allow tent camping on their property for the homeless. Your beaches are now full. Your city parks, your libraries, your universities are full. And people are coming there in droves. At Salt Lake City, in 2015, the state, the city, the church put $60 million into housing. During that period of time, they housed everyone who was homeless. Comedy Central got a hold of that. They call it We Homed the Homeless. The video went viral. What do you think today's like in Salt Lake City? They have a higher homeless population today in 2018 than they did in 2015 when they housed everybody. And so we walk this tightrope. We want to make sure you guys know as a community that we're here for you, the role we play in supporting you. We want to invite you to the conversation, but shh, don't tell anybody. Okay? So if it's okay with you, I'll go ahead and hit play on the video. Is that all right? Unless somebody wants to come up. You got it? All right, so I'll kind of give you a little details before you hit play here. So has anybody here heard the song Come to the Table by Sidewalk Prophets? You got a few of you. So just I'll do my liability piece. I have permission from them to create this video on behalf of the shelter. It does have some religious connotations. And so I want to always remind people that we're 100% non-denominational. We were launched by 8 churches 26 years ago. So we don't want to forget where we came from and who we are, but we also want to know that we're moving forward in our community and that we serve a vast population of people. So this is our invitation to you to come to the table to join us in the conversation.
We all start on the outside looking in. This is where grace begins. We were hungry, we were thirsty, with nothing left to give. Oh, the shape that we were in. And just when all hope seemed lost, love opened the door for us. He said, come to the table. Come join the sinners who have been redeemed. Take your place beside the Savior. Sit down and be set free. Come to the table. Liars and these thieves, there's no one unwelcome here. And that sin and shame that you brought with you, you can leave it at the door and let mercy draw you near. So come to the table. Come join the sinners who have been redeemed. Take your place beside the Savior. Sit down and be set free. Come to the table. Come to the table.
So I remember the first time I watched this video, I was sitting in my dining room with my children, and it was about 30 degrees outside, but we knew we had a wind chill come in our direction. If you remember in January, it ended up being minus 40 degrees outside, which is almost unbearable for even our heating systems in our own homes to keep up. And I was sitting around the dining room table, and I watched this for the very first time, and I couldn't help but shed a tear and cry. Because I think about the individuals that are in that, and most of you probably can't tell the difference between who's a client, who's an employee, and who's there to serve as a volunteer. Because if I actually pointed out who was who to you, you'd be shocked. There's a gentleman that's in this video, he makes $9 an hour. I just bumped his page to 11. But he made $9 an hour when this video was shot, and he gave $25 per paycheck to the United Way. So I know I'm not here to necessarily tout the United Way and what they do to help those with essential needs, but I always like to challenge people about how much do you make? He makes $9 an hour, and he finds a way to give a little bit back because he knows how important it is to the people in our community to raise them up and to serve. So this is our invitation to you to come to the table. You saw in that video, how many people have been to Central Iowa Shelter and Service, been and seen our facility? All right, so you got a little bit of a window of who we are and what we look like. I see a couple nods, yes. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Central Iowa Shelter, what we do, how many individuals we serve in Iowa each year, and then let's talk some actual specific numbers to our region and some of what the future looks like, and then we'll do some Q&A back and forth. I'm pretty conversational, so if you got a question in the middle of it, just interrupt me, and I know they've got a microphone. They're on standby over there. I think they're getting ready to do some wind sprints, so they're good. All right, so Central Iowa, we serve the entire state of Iowa. We're the largest homeless shelter in the state of Iowa. We have 150 emergency beds. Other than the people I told a minute ago, do you know how many people we sleep in an emergency shelter right now? Anybody? Take a guess? 180. Any more? 220 last night. Quickly do the math and you'll realize that 70 people slept in chairs less comfortable than the one you're sitting in this evening. Yet we sit here and we say, gosh, why can't they get up and go get housing and get up and go to work every day? So we actually spent the night sleeping in these chairs right now. Do you think you'd be effective in the workplace? Do you think you'd have a good day at school? How do you think you'd feel about wanting to get out and go look for housing? And this is where in homelessness in particular, we can turn our days into nights and our nights into days. Simply because we didn't get a good night's rest here. And so once it warms up and the sun comes up, I'm going to go outside and see if I can't find a place to rest outside on the ground just to get a little bit of sleep so that I can go be a productive citizen. So I just want people to think about that, because when I run out of chairs, where do they sleep? And we will run out of chairs, unfortunately. They have to rest their head on a cafeteria-style table, no different than what you see in our public schools where our children have those small little seats and they get to rest their head on the table. Unfortunately, I can't throw out more cots. We all of a sudden run into fire codes and everything else when we do that. And so this winter, we'll be upwards to 300 people in emergency shelter. The occupancy actually in my facility is 246. So we do everything we can, working with our local community partners to make sure that everyone is welcome. The door doesn't close, and we are considered a low barrier shelter. Therefore, we accept you if you're intoxicated, we accept you if you've got a criminal background, we accept you regardless of your faith or your race or denomination, anything at all. And that's very unique. Not a lot of other emergency shelters in the state of Iowa allow overflow or are a low barrier facility. We're also the only shelter in the state of Iowa that accepts women. Women without children, women who are not married, women who do not have a domestic violence relationship, which is also something that a lot of people question, is they don't understand, and it's something that's really important to acknowledge. A lot of the other emergency shelters will turn a woman away if they don't have kids or want in a DV situation. So the majority of the individuals we serve are 45 to 54 years old. They are white males, and they typically have some disability. That disability could be addiction, mental health, or some other physical ailment. Just recently, we had a gentleman come to us from outside of the state of Iowa because he knew that our medical system, believe it or not, was stronger than New Mexico. He knew that he could come here for support, and he knew exactly where to go because of his time in politics. He had a brain tumor. So it's important for people to recognize that the ones you see in the video, you probably don't know who's homeless and who's not, because they could easily be the person sitting in your chair right now. So other than 150 emergency beds that are always full, we have a second floor that's Section 8 apartments. We have 38 apartments on our section floor in partnership with the city of Des Moines. And we have 19 apartments that are dedicated to veterans on our third floor. Now the VA places the individuals on the third floor, but it's really important to note that still 12% of the residents that we serve annually are veterans. That's 173 people that served our country who still need help. Whether they're reintegrating back into the system, they have a post-traumatic stress, an alcohol addiction, but they're individuals that still fall through the gap. And so on Veterans Day on the 11th, we give a quick shout out to my friends over at G&L Clothing in Des Moines, did a huge event for us, partnered up with Carhartt, just to make sure that we continue to bring more and more awareness to the fact that we have individuals who raised their hands, said, I will serve our country, yet when they come back, they're falling through the gap. So our emergency shelter oftentimes fills the third floor with our veterans, but it's still up to the VA to place those individuals into shelter, into transitional housing. Beyond that, we serve 5 meals a day: breakfast, lunch, dinner, 2 snacks. We have a separate food pantry that you saw in the video. We have a full clothing closet. We have a computer lab classroom that's about ready to get renovated with our friends at Cognizant Foundation and Project Iowa, and I'll talk about Project Iowa here in a little bit. We also have a medical clinic, 2 community health nurses, dental, mental health, behavioral health, substance abuse. It's pretty much a one-stop shop for anybody living in extreme poverty. Now, I will share just a short story here. We did recently have a couple out of Oskaloosa come to our facility, 84 and 85 years old. And when I first found out this couple had come to our facility asking for help, it absolutely broke my heart. And I actually wanted to chase down the vehicle that dropped them off and ask a whole lot of questions about what just happened. But this is the root cause of the story. Oftentimes, children take care of their parents as they age, and especially when they're experiencing Alzheimer's or dementia. Unfortunately, landlords don't always see it that way. And this particular young man had a family, and he moved his parents in with him. Landlord found out. He was in violation of his lease. This young man had to pick between him and his family being evicted to the streets, as well as his parents, or drop his parents off at the shelter to make sure that him and his family continue to maintain their housing. So when every system fails in our community, whether it's healthcare, judicial system, education, we are the last resort. It's either us or the jail. And the last thing we want to do is to criminalize homelessness because somebody fell through a gap somewhere along the line. So beyond all those services, we also have a job training program. We have roughly 10 to 12 people that serve in our facility every single day. You saw our community kitchen program. You saw a little bit in that video, that great geodesic growing dome and the raised beds. Our team, our trainees, and the people who live with us produce over 3,000 pounds of fruits and vegetables that go directly into our community kitchen. The trainees in the community kitchen prepare those meals. They go back into our shelter, into the over 165,000 meals that we serve in our community every single year to make sure the parents don't have to pick between putting food on the table and paying rent. We serve in populations where no one else wants to go, but I will say this: if you ever come and volunteer and you want to serve alongside that team, it's absolutely mind-blowing the number of kids that come out of anywhere to get food. 1 in 6 kids don't know where their next meal is coming from. A lot of adults don't know. And so when you really think about that we're one paycheck away, our society is living too close to that line. And I know it's a tightrope, but we walk it way too often in our society today. So I'm going to pause really quick because I got a whole lot more I can share, but I know there's questions in the audience, and I'd like to just pause for a second and see if I can help close some gaps. Go ahead.
Well, according to the memes I see on Facebook, it's illegals and refugees who are causing this homelessness. There would be no homelessness if we just eliminate that. So what do you see from your perspective?
Yeah, great question. We actually have a community partner that also deals with immigrants and refugees, and actually they're productive members of our society. Obviously people are going to have their own political opinion one way or another, but I think we oftentimes forget about the big picture. My husband grew up in a small town in Iowa, and we were having this conversation around the dinner table, and I reminded him, are you going to go work that job at $9 an hour at the Tyson plant? And he's like, well, no. And I'm like, well, who's going to do that? So I think it's always important for us to think about the big picture, and rather placing judgment on one particular demographic or another, we have to recognize that we have several little pieces of our systems that are failing us. The mental health, addiction. I go back to when I mentioned earlier, the core reason why CISS exists is we have to remember our roots. We have to remember where we came from. And 26 years ago, these churches came together, they united as one, and they said no more. And what we remember out of that is a vision statement that our team has, and it is very simple. It's to provide growth for all with courage and opportunity. That every single employee of our organization has a responsibility to help other people grow. Whether you're educating or advocating, it's important for people to see the entire big picture to the story. So while refugees and immigrants may be a part of it, we do see migrant workers around I-80 all the time, especially those passing between California and Ohio, but we're here to help them. The last thing we want is to separate a family, a core family, and then you get all the other traumas that are associated that with the children growing up. And then you'll see more people in our homeless system. Yeah.
Follow up on that. The last couple of years in Iowa, they've, of course, decreased funding for homeless shelters. They've closed mental health and substance abuse facilities. And let's see, what else have they done? Has that increased homelessness, or has that helped? I mean, is that what puts the veterans and the other folks on the street when you close facilities and cut funding?
Well, actually, we've actually seen the opposite. And so that's actually one of the myths that we actually see in our community today. So our homelessness, I see some people that are surprised. If you look at housing and urban development, if you look at our funding from the city of Des Moines and from the VA, it's all gone up.
What about the state?
State funding as well, so that's State Emergency Solutions Grant, correct. So all of our funding streams have actually gone up in our facility and around the programs that we serve, including job training. So while we talk about all these cuts in funding, I haven't seen it. And in fact, all my budget tells me the opposite. In fact, we just received a 5-year grant from SAMHSA, it's called. It's a federal DHS to help serve in the opioid crisis and substance abuse. That's a 5-year commitment of $2 million that all focuses on case management and helping people with addiction that are homeless. So on the contrary of what they're saying about all these budget cuts, mine's been the opposite direction.
You're talking about a mix of state, city, and federal dollars as well as state dollars.
And local community support, all three. So, I mean, when I look at our funding streams, I'm talking federal, state, county, city, all across the board. Yep. Go ahead, I see some disbelief. Ask the question.
Hi, you mentioned that a lot of the shelters don't accept women. I was just kind of curious why that policy would be.
I have no idea. If you find out, I'd be more than happy to partner and have some people exit my facility. I don't know the answer to that, to be quite honest. Now, we do see more women that are homeless in the summer months. We have 50 beds dedicated to women. Oftentimes during the holiday season, we see our women's numbers go down, partly because women are less likely to leave a domestic violence relationship in the winter months because it's cold out and they have it uncertain as to where they're going to stay. We also see people more willing to take a female in during the holiday season, just that generous and giving heart. But if you can figure that out, I would love to know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead. I keep forgetting about, got to pass the mic.
So what's the average stay for the person who comes into your homeless shelter?
Yeah, we're 41 days right now. So I want to preface this a little bit. The number actually used to be quite a bit lower. When we really established our vision statement for the organization, one of the things we did is we said, let's take a look at our policies and make sure they're in alignment with what the community needs. And I totally ruffled feathers when I did it, which was always kind of fun, right? So we changed our length of stay. We used to be 90 days in, 90 days out, and then we would just go back and forth. Well, when we started looking at the data, we found that 35% of our residents that we were serving at that time were shared by other facilities. So we said, hold on a second, they're just playing this game. They'd go see you for 90 days, come see me for 90 days, go see you for 90 days. And it was like, hold on, we're not doing that anymore. So what we decided to do is change our policy to 90 in, 90 out, 60 days in, 90 out, 30 days in, 90 out. And then we're talking either program fee or this 30-day in, 90-day out, consistent back and forth. Now, we haven't reached that yet. Now, the one caveat was this. I would allow you to stay as long as you were a productive member of our community. If you were sitting around lazy and you were thinking this place was a hammock, no, you're out. If you were trying, if you were consistently looking for housing, you were consistently applying for jobs, you were bettering yourself through an education, you were contributing back to the society that you lived, I let you stay as long as you need to, which is why our length of stay number went up. So we teeter around 45. We've gotten as high as 54 this last year. We even have a community partnership with Polk County Health Services that provides funding for people to rapidly rehouse them and then keep them housed for a long period of time. Those numbers will show that once they get one of those case managers, they could stay in the facility for much longer, even 100 days plus. Yeah, so it's very, very difficult to get kicked out of our facility. If you ever hear somebody's not allowed to come back, I want you to think two things. They were either lazy and they weren't trying at all, or there were some behavioral issue that put the other residents at risk or my staff at risk. Otherwise, pretty much anybody can stay as long as they are participating and giving back.
Thank you.
Thank you. When you talk about the funding you got for the opioid epidemic, how would you assess the effectiveness? Like, where do you go back and say, like, in 90 days, we tried to help this person, X, Y, and Z? Like, will you see people returning with the same addiction and struggle? Like, what are your staff, doing to help and prepare beyond, them leaving your facility?
Yeah, so let's first big picture on opioid crisis. We hear a lot about it, right? And we're all concerned about, does this happen in my backyard? The reality is this: our numbers for opioids, at least in Des Moines, are very, very, very low. The drug of choice is still meth. And so this particular grant focuses on substance abuse in general, while the funding stream came through opioid to make sure that we in Des Moines and in Central Iowa do not have a problem. Okay, so it's more of a prevention. Now, we have a case management team. If you saw, my video guy had jokes, okay? So when the song got to that motley crew of misfits, those are all my case managers, okay? So we had jokes on them a little bit. But that team will stay with somebody for 9 months. Okay, this is where we go from giving somebody a fish to teaching them how to fish. So over this 9-month period, we slowly step people away so that there doesn't become a codependency upon one another. Because remember, my goal is to put myself out of a job. If I create a codependency between the two of us, then I haven't done my job as a nonprofit. My goal is to really teach people how to be a good tenant, how to handle different situations, how to learn their neighborhood and their society so that they don't end up coming back. So we don't have any set data on this piece because we just got started on October 1st, and so you're going to see that over this 5-year period.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Some of your answers have surprised me a little bit. My understanding was we have crisis intervention services, CIS in Oskaloosa, and my understanding that was the only women's shelter south of I-80 that was still open due to state funding cuts. So I'm a little puzzled at some of your answers. Are there other women's shelters south of I-80 that are still in existence?
Let's see.
I understood a couple closed.
Yeah, so Bethel Mission, which also serves the state of Iowa, Central Iowa, they do have a women's shelter. Typically, though, children are with the female during that time. Iowa City, the shelter house, does accept women as well. Typically families, they don't usually do anything with domestic violence. There are several domestic violence shelters that help support women all around our community. So to say that the funding cuts were the reason, maybe that's true for Oskaloosa, but I can tell you it's not true for the rest of the state.
Well, I'm talking south of I-80. That's why I understood several had closed because of state funding cuts, was my understanding. Yeah. That's why I was asking that question.
Yeah, so I know Osceola, I believe, had a facility of some sort, but I don't think it was just women, and I do think they focused on mental health crisis in Osceola as well. That one did close because of state funding cuts. Thinking south of I-80, Muscatine would be another one that accepts women, typically though with children as well, and I know that they're revamping their shelter, and that would be south of 80. So there is still funding out there for the shelters, and again, that money has gone up. There could have been something, again, that was gone wrong in a grant application. It'd be really an important conversation for you to talk about the Iowa Council of Homelessness. Iowa Finance Authority holds that council. There's a huge meeting tomorrow, and I'd be happy to ask Amber Lewis, who's in charge of that. But that'd be rare other than to say something else had to have happened in that process. Sorry, I don't know more. I can't necessarily speak on behalf of the state as what happened on that.
Can you go back? This one's more a question about you and your position. You said you hope to you'd like to put yourself out of business in your organization.
Absolutely.
If that's the goal. I imagine that some days it probably seems like a really challenging battle to do that. How do you, in a role like this, how do you stay positive? How do you kind of keep yourself pumped up for serving
for the
in this
everyday?
role? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I first have to acknowledge that I've got an absolutely amazing team. If you have ever come into our facility, you can see the true essence of humanity at work. When you can't help but smile when you see our team. We have a gentleman in our kitchen that I mentioned, his name is Jerome, and that man sings and dances and finds the most enjoyment in life by serving those food who don't have anything to eat. So part of what fills my tank every single day is knowing that I've got this amazing team that it's my job to come and to advocate on their behalf, to make sure that not only do they have a paycheck, but they can put food on the table for their children as well. So they fuel my tank as much as the clients do. And then I also think that it's the understanding that we all have a purpose. We all have something in our lives that help lift us up. And for me, growing up as a small kid, it was always taught to me is how do you help the next person up in line? My father in particular made it very clear to me, he says, Melissa, when you make it, it's your role and responsibility to reach back and say, come on, you can make it too. So even on those really, really bad days, you have to find that light. I think Mr. Rogers always said, go towards those people that are serving. Go to those people that are caring and doing the good. And that's my team. And so it's very, very easy, even on a bad day, to head to the office because I know they'll still put a smile on my face and I get to see true humanity at work. Mm-hmm. All right, this side of the room has been really quiet. It's like all the questions are over here. So come on. There have been great questions. What are you curious about? Something drew you to come in this evening.
So I'm from Utah, so that was the first thought when I came here was how well I thought Utah was still doing on the homeless issue.
Yeah,
and
no.
what do you think the biggest issue was like with their program? And what are you doing differently to be so successful and just keep it consistent?
All right, so great question. I'm going to start with the end of that. So what am I doing to be successful? And I told these guys from the beginning, this video can't go viral. Okay? So where Salt Lake City really went wrong was not in the program. It wasn't even in the delivery of the program. What happened is people all of a sudden found out that Salt Lake City had homed, we joke, the homeless. You can YouTube video this. There was an amazing story about how they built $60 million worth of housing. They took everybody who was homeless, everybody who was at risk, and they literally housed them. Nobody was on the streets of Salt Lake City. Well, Comedy Central picked up on it, and they agreed to a story. Now, if you've ever watched Jimmy's story, absolutely hilarious story on how they homed the homeless. Very, very educational. But that video got seen by so many people that what ended up happening is the people out of California in particular, in Denver, came that direction. So between Colorado and California, they came in droves to Salt Lake City because they were under the impression that they would get housed when they felt hopeless everywhere else. And that's part of the reason why the issues are where they are. We have seen a higher population coming from outside of the state as well. Our numbers continue to creep up a little bit at a time, but that's really where they erred. We recently, when we received $100,000 from the Trump Foundation 2 years ago to support our veterans, I can't tell you how many phone calls I had about people wanting us to be on late night TV. Or when the state of Iowa, to your funding cut piece, started to cut Planned Parenthood. Well, apparently CISS was on the list of Planned Parenthood and receiving services. And so everybody had all kinds of jokes. Well, we just said, no, that's not going to be a part of this conversation. And so that's going to be a really important piece. And you'll see me talk about it all the time, that the more we can advocate, the more we can educate, the more we can have each one of you go and talk about homelessness and hunger around the dinner table. Okay, this isn't politics and it's not religion. It's okay to talk about something that's not sexy like cancer research or heart disease. Homelessness doesn't get a ton of attention. People are worried about it, people are concerned about it, but they want somebody else to do it. And so we have to start having those conversations if we're going to stay ahead of it in our state. And that's just, it's very difficult for people to do that because they don't see it every single day. Okay, drive to Chicago right now. They don't have any shelters that allow overflow. Head to Washington, D.C. Go to Portland, Oregon. And you're going to see a whole nother story about what's going on. Now, I will say this. Looking inside your own community right now, I bet you have students here at William Penn that are hungry and that are homeless. Anybody know somebody doubled up on somebody else's couch? Anybody know a student that is struggling academically and is at risk of failing out but doesn't want to go tell mom and dad? That student is at risk of homelessness. And in the months of May and June, I have more college students come to our facility asking for help. And we teach them to have the courageous conversation and to go home. So I guarantee you, especially over Christmas break, really think about how many students are struggling, because I bet you have some. I bet you have a few that may only eat 1 or 2 meals a day in your cafeteria, or don't know where their next meal is coming from. We always joke about the college student diet of ramen noodles. That's legit, but what if you can't afford the ramen noodles? So hunger and homelessness was started at Villanova University to help to support the students on their own campus who were struggling with these issues, but maybe were not identified. So that's where it really starts, is we have to make sure that we're having the conversation, we're getting out to talk to other people about it. We just can't take it for granted that it's somebody else's responsibility. So Salt Lake City did nothing wrong with the program. It's how they communicated the message about what they did right. Other questions? So what are you going to do with the cookies when you're done tonight? I bet you have somebody in this community who's hungry. Do you have a food pantry in your community? So don't let those cookies go to waste. Because if you don't want them, I'll take them. I got a whole bunch of people that would love to have them.
So how do the neighboring states, how does that influence our state with homelessness?
Yeah.
The neighboring states and homelessness that exists around Iowa, how is that influencing and impacting our state with homelessness? My brother-in-law in Springfield, Missouri, they have a huge existence of camp cities.
Yep. In Kansas City, in Chicago, in Minneapolis, in Omaha, we watch very, very closely. Minneapolis just passed some new regulations on the camping in particular. So if you drive through Minneapolis at all, right there on I-35, you're going to see a lot more tent camping now on the interstate between, it's that little easement, right? So I-235 in Des Moines has the same little easement, but in Minneapolis, that's where they're camping, and so you see it more prevalent there. What's happening, I don't know necessarily about Springfield, but in Chicago, obviously you have a lot of people who are rent burdened, excessively rent burdened. And so those individuals are coming this direction. We did recently, about 3 weeks ago, have an increase of 19 individuals, just let alone came from Chicago. They passed through Dubuque, they passed through Iowa City, and what they learned was their shelters were full and there wasn't any place for them to find affordable housing. But they heard through the grapevine that we allowed overflow in our facility and that we didn't turn anybody away. Now, some people would say, what the heck, right? Our team looks at it more as an opportunity. With unemployment rates as low as they are in the state of Iowa, I look at it as how can I re-engage in our workforce? How can I have the individuals that are staying with us, whether through our job training program, but actually get back to work where we have a plethora of jobs available. So we do see an influence from outside of the state of Iowa. To big picture, you name a state in the union and I've got at least one person from it, including Hawaii and Alaska. So we do have some of that. There for a while, we had consistent communications with Anchorage, Alaska, on homeless populations and some transient nature we were seeing between some of our residents. But it does happen. I have people that know the highways and the byways of the United States better than they know the alphabet. But it's because they grew up homeless. They grew up with that background.
That's nice that you say that, because it's reframing how we see the homeless, right? Not as unintelligent beings who have nothing to contribute back to the community, but instead as people who do have something to contribute back to society. Yeah, and I learned that from them, by the way. So we had a resident this last year in that geodesic growing dome. It got really, really cold, right? January, February, they're trying to get me to spend $10,000 on putting a 220 outlet to my growing dome. And I'm like, guys, I don't have the money for that. I'm going to house people if I'm spending that kind of money. So we had a veteran who stole the coffee pot from his peers, which was a whole nother conversation. And he rigged the coffee pot. It was absolutely brilliant. We have a pond with koi fish, and the water was getting cold. But we needed that to be hot to heat the rest of the dome. So we ran the cold water into the coffee pot, did a drip out, heated it up, did a drip out the other side, and that thing was 80 degrees in February.
with a coffee pot. So that's when we first started to realize, hey, there is an answer. And this is why we talk this session the way we do. There's an answer in the room. It may not come from me, it may not come from you, but someone in here is percolating, got that, about something that can help us solve this problem. And if we all come together and we start thinking outside the box and we start reframing how we view individuals who are living on our streets, then we're going to be stronger for it as a community.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm originally from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, so I'm no stranger to seeing someone at a library sleeping on a park bench kind of thing. And I'm grateful for your organization because unknowingly, again, my son is 10 years old, and I remember when he was about 4 or 5, we went home to Florida, and he couldn't wrap his mind around seeing a homeless person. He said, why is that person sleeping, outside? And you can tell me if it's none of my business, but I'm curious to know. I've never been homeless before. I can't say I know what it's like to go without a meal, but I've also helped a lot of people. I do believe in service, and sometimes I think, especially as an instructor, that there's a barrier to what people will tell you in terms of what's really going on. And so in the spirit of leadership, I mean, I don't have to be the CEO of an organization. I'm a believer in that, you know what I mean, to really affect change and to help people. But from your experience and your conversations with people, I know there's an element of shame, when it comes to homelessness, or just saying, not because I've been homeless, but I can understand why there would be, I guess that's a better way to say it, an element of shame. But what makes them get to, I guess, just that point to where they said, enough is enough, I need to come in here because I need help? Like, how can we help prevent that process? I know for many years, I used to run an after-school program here in town. It was the only free after-school program in the city. And it was so important to me because, and I know I violate a lot of rules, don't send extra food. There's a rule that people are not able to eat, and those people are children, most of the time. And so I would fill their bags with whatever they needed, and I kind of didn't care, if I got in trouble for it. But with that, what are some of the barriers that you face in some of those conversations when people don't want to just open up and say, I'm really struggling right now?
So first of all, thank you. I don't think enough people are doing what you're doing when you were putting that extra food in their backpack. So first of all, thank you. It's not always an easy decision to make, but it's the right decision to make. You will see me and my team, we really train and we talk about erring on the side of humanity.
Right.
I will go in front of anybody and say, I let this extra person in, or I gave them this extra food, or I gave them this blanket, and let somebody else shoot bullets at me any day of the week. So there's not many conversation that I don't go into where I just get absolutely drilled with questions, people who just don't understand. So first of all, thank you very much, because we don't have enough people that are going that extra little step and not doing it because they're in the limelight. Back to your question, our team really believes a lot in relationship. Okay, when you are truly in relationship, when you really know who each other are and you're willing to have the courageous conversations, when you lean into those conversations, that's when you start having people tell you a little bit more about what's going on. They won't always make it simple for you, right? And so we talk a lot about what is it that the person's saying, but they're not really saying. Our team pays very, very close attention to body language. So you saw me even joke a little bit of, I see that there's people squirming in the chair, so I know you got questions. A lot of that goes back to that training that we give our team on just being aware of their surroundings, being aware of what is it that the person's sharing with us, but maybe not sharing. That's a lot about being in relationships. Get to know the person, start peeling back the layers of the onion, find the root cause, and you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared for the answer, because if you as a leader are willing to ask the question, you got to be able to answer it. So just be prepared as you step into those conversations. But you're right, it takes a lot of courage. That's why our vision statement is clear, is to provide growth to all with courage and opportunity. Some people coming into our facility have not hit rock bottom yet. Right. For you and me, coming in the facility might be rock bottom. But for a lot of those individuals, it's not rock bottom. And so how do we help them where they're at? It's not for me to place judgment on them. It's not for me to say, okay, you're here, so I got to take you there. It's really about meeting them where they're at and helping to lift them up. We just recently had an individual who we had known for some time. He'd been in and out of our facility a little bit here and there between tent camping and staying in the shelter to stay warm. And one night he didn't check in. And so we're like, all right, he's out tent camping again. The very next day, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, our team finds him freezing cold asleep on the sidewalk. His body metabolism was trying to keep him warm and other organs were beginning to shut down. And our team knew what to do because they had a relationship. We pulled him in, we got him a hat, a scarf, a glove, blankets, started to have conversations with him, let him sleep a little bit. Unfortunately, the conversation went downhill from there, but we did this. It wasn't my responsibility. I gave it to the person who had the relationship. So I have a staff member, his name is Philip, he might even be watching tonight. Philip stood in the gap. Because he had a relationship with him. He knew who he was, he knew his name, he knew his story, and he was able to really start to engage him. Now, do we know what the future leads for this young man? No, we don't. But we have the relationship, and we've planted the seed, and maybe this time he's hit rock bottom, and he'll come back ready to change. But if not, we'll meet him where he's at. And that's all we can ask.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you. All right. Other questions? Anything? Yeah, go ahead.
There's something, and this is more of a statement just to think about. I worked a cargo down in Ottumwa for the last 15 years, and we have a lot of brothers and sisters from Mexico, Guatemala, from Bosnia, and all over the world, over 50 nations. For people who complain about immigrants, I say this. As long as the jobs are here, they're not going to hurt us because anyone can apply for those jobs. The next time someone complains, if the jobs are here, then they can go apply for them. So just, really, that's all we need to remember. We're all in this together on this planet. So that's, at least that's what I wanted to share with all of you, yeah.
Thank you. Oh, got one more back there.
I just had a quick question. I was wondering, how could you get involved with something like this? You know, a lot of us, we see the issue, we see the problem, but we don't know how to get involved. We don't know how to help these people. You know, and I know for a fact there's quite a bit of homeless right here in Oskaloosa. I've seen them. I'm friends with several of them. But a lot of folks don't know how to even try and address that situation without getting into the politics and worrying about the rules and regulations of this, that, and the other.
So I'm going to go back to don't always worry about the rules and regulations, right? Sometimes I think those rules and regulations, while they're great, they're there to protect us. The reality is, in my vantage point, anyway, at least where I sit every single day, is the last thing I want is somebody to perish on the streets of Des Moines because I denied them a service or a right that any one of us has the privilege of having. So while the rules and regulations are there, I always go back to if I can defend it to my mom, and it can make sense to my mom, then I'll probably go do it over here, okay? So simple ways to get to help. You have, and I know I'm going to point over here a little bit, you have a coalition that focuses on homelessness in Mahaska County. You also have a group that's coming together and forming, I'm going to use some jargon here, so I apologize, called the Balance of State. You have 3 counties, Mahaska County being one of those 3 that have come together to really start standing in the gap to help those who are homeless. Sometimes they're putting them up in churches. Unfortunately, I think the ER was still one of the options. You also have a general assistance here in Mahaska County, and you have Section 8 affordable housing vouchers available. The Balance of State, this group that's coming together, sometimes it's about volunteering on that team in your own community where you can sit down with somebody, help them do what's called an intake. That intake gives them a vulnerability index score. That index score tells us how much are they eligible for state resources to help them get into housing extremely quickly. There's a program called Rapid Rehousing. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's all about rapidly rehousing individuals who are homeless. But it takes a group of committed individuals from your community so that it doesn't fall on just one person's lap. That there shouldn't just be one person that's having to answer that call, but a coalition or a team of individuals who are willing to come together to help address the situation. So I would first go back back to your own coalition here, you also have other nonprofits in your community that I know are looking for volunteers. That I know they're looking for people that can help. I'll give a simple one. We have 6 guys that came together to do IT for us in our community. Now, not your standard group of volunteers. Like, Melissa, why in the world you got a team of 6 people that are doing IT for you? Well, because then I don't have to spend money with a technology company. These volunteers are doing it for me, and I can take those same resources and go house somebody. So you have, every single one of us have a talent, we have a gift, we have something that we love to do. And I would just challenge you to go back and find that volunteer opportunity in your own community where you can give back and contribute. Maybe it's manning the food pantry for a little bit. Maybe it's going to help with an after-school program so that children can read to learn after 3rd grade. Because I can't tell you how many people I have in my facility that can't read at a 3rd grade level. So your volunteerism, even to our children, and helping them to grow up, can break down so many of these barriers to homelessness. Go be a foster care parent. I can't tell you how many kids are falling through our gaps in the foster care system because they don't have a caring adult to walk with them. Go volunteer in your Big Brothers Big Sisters organization. So there's plenty of opportunities to get involved. I'm not sure if your local United Way helps facilitate those conversations or if your extension, it does a little bit.
There is a volunteer link on United Way.
So I would really encourage you to go back to your United Way and sign up for those volunteer opportunities. If you're not the type of person that wants to have boots on the ground, go volunteer for a board of directors position. Help with governance, help with policy, help turn the curve in the system so that more of these nonprofits link arms and work together. The biggest thing we can do is maximize the potential of that $1. And that's where I would really challenge you. If you want to get involved, yeah, sure, I'd love to have you up at our facility and invite any of you to come and serve a meal. But I guarantee you, you can walk out these doors tonight and know somebody that could use an extra help or an extra blanket or something to eat, or maybe it's the book at Christmas time that they wouldn't have otherwise. So just really think about your own backyard with United Way has opportunities, and I'd encourage you to go that direction. Anything else? So I can leave you with this simple piece. This week was Hunger and Homelessness Week all across the entire country. This is our opportunity, especially on college campuses, to really bring awareness back to the issues that are surrounding us every single day. So as you go home tonight, really think about what is my role and what is my responsibility. Could you look in the mirror tonight and go to bed thinking, I've done my part, I'm good to go, or is there something that's stirring inside your belly right now that's keeping you up at night? Because if you really want to lead, you've got to figure out how you're going to stand in the gap for those who are less fortunate in your community. And I'm not even talking about just hunger and homelessness. I can go back to that 3rd grader who's struggling to read. Go over the lunch hour and ask a teacher if you can sit and read with a kid. Because that could be the turning point in that child's life that could make sure that they don't experience what we're talking about right now in their future. They could have a family member at home that's going through a domestic violence situation or is addicted to drugs, but you spending that time with that child could really be the turning point. So as we talk about hunger and homelessness, while we're bringing an awareness to this issue in our community, each one of us have something that we can do to spark a light in somebody else. So really go home, look in the mirror, and say, have I done enough for today? Because, back to why we're here, the answer isn't in me, it's not in CISS, but it's sitting right here in this room, and you've got to decide what role you want to play in it. So thank you guys very much, and have a great night. I'll be around for a little bit if there's any other questions.